Okay, let's make a start. My name is Ehsan Masood, and as Dr. Al-Faham said, it's a real pleasure to be moderating this next session, the penultimate session for today. I am a science journalist, and I'm the editor of a publication called Research Professional. I'm from the United Kingdom, and in the UK, we are sometimes known as Research Fortnight. We are a daily news service providing news and information about science funding and science policy. Every week, lots of researchers from around the world use us for the Holy Grail, which is to find funding for their projects, for their promotions, and for their academic research every day. As I said, it's a real pleasure to be back here in Alexandria and to be moderating this panel, which is on the topic of science, technology, research, and innovation. Yesterday, I was very lucky to spend some time with some of you, some early career researchers, discussing the so-called perfect storm, the storm of the new technologies, which you've been hearing about all day today and before, that are so central to our lives, but yet are also so implicated in the events that are threatening our planet's future. And in many ways, those who govern us, our policymakers, those who we are responsible to and in turn are responsible for us, they have many more expectations of those of you in the science community, in the research community, to find answers to why our economies are slowing down, answers to other future sources of growth, answers to conflicts, both between states and within states, answers to big environmental challenges like climate change and global warming. To help guide us through this maze, what the development economist Simon Maxwell has recently called the wicked problem are some very uniquely nice people. And I'm going to introduce them very quickly. Starting just to my left is Mohammed Hassan, who you've already met for many years, the founding director of the World Academy of Sciences based in Trieste. Earlier, just now, we heard Mohammed chaired a session with some distinguished Nobel Laureates, and Mohammed was handpicked by one of the greatest of them, one of the greatest physicists of the 20th century, Abdus Salam, from Imperial College. Mohammed trained as a mathematician, and he worked on the modeling of sand dunes, coming to that after a career in nuclear fusion. He is now in Sudan, where he's helping to build a new Academy of Science. John Kalama is an incurable tech entrepreneur. He studied pharmacy and medicinal chemistry and has worked in community pharmacy and in R&D, in commercial R&D. He's the founding director of a company called the Kalama International Consulting Group, and his speciality is bio-based businesses. If you're looking to commercialize IP from natural products, then John is your man. William Saito is another incurable tech entrepreneur. He's a special advisor to Japan's Cabinet Office and a member of the Independent Commission investigating the Fukushima accident. He's built and he's sold businesses and now spends his time helping others to do the same. He's written many books, and my favorite has a very catchy title which you must all go out and buy. It's called An Unprogrammed Life, Adventures of an Uncurable Entrepreneur. And then next to William, we have João de Paes Carvalho, who is a rare breed. He's an environmentalist with an MBA. There aren't many of those around. He has a very wide portfolio of experience, having worked in biotech, in chemicals, electronics, plastics, and consulting, and his specialty is resource depletion and waste recycling. Today, he runs an organization called Business Brazil. And last, and by no means least, we are privileged to have somebody who must surely be the youngest head of a science policy research department anywhere in the world, I suspect, Jason Blackstock, who is the head of the department at University College in London. He has a first degree in literature, a PhD in physics, postgraduate degrees in public administration and international security. Jason is a genuine polymath. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your panel. Now, I've suggested to our speakers that they kindly restrict their opening lines to just a few minutes, if they can. And in order to help them prepare, I did ask them some questions. One of these questions was, what are the two most critical challenges or obstacles to progress in research for innovation and sustainable development? And what two practical things can we all do to better equip early career researchers especially, the next generation, to cope with these challenges. They're going to make some presentations, then we'll have a discussion with you and between ourselves. And just towards the end, I'm going to invite our rapporteur, Mohammed Yahya. Mohammed, can you stand up, please? Mohammed is the executive editor of Nature here in the Middle East. He is the nearest thing that this region has to Brian Cox, and I'm sure we'll see him on TV one day. And Mohammed's going to give us the benefit of his insights, having heard the discussion. So without further ado, Mohammed, will you please kick us off? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ihsan, for the introduction. As you can see, the title of this very short talk is Promoting Science, Technology, and Innovation to Achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And with special reference to the developing countries. The Sustainable Development Goals, that you have seen them before, there are 17 goals with 169 targets, and they are supposed to transform the world. You can see that there is no standalone sustainable development goal in science, technology, and innovation, or for science, technology, and innovation. But science, technology, and innovation cuts across all the sustainable development goals. If you can see each one of them, you will see that there must be a link to science, technology, and innovation. And goal number 13, SDG 13, is on climate change, and that is climate action. And we're very happy that this climate action started shortly after the agreement on the Sustainable Development Goals, and that is this very historic agreement reached by 195 countries that adopted the Universal Agreement to limit global warming below 2 degrees. The Sustainable Development Goals are, as you can see, global. They are interconnected, and for them to be achieved, we must have science, technology, and innovation as a driver for each one of these Sustainable Development Goals. For this to succeed, we must have a minimum capacity in science, technology, and innovation in all countries. So each country should have a minimum capacity to enable it to drive this implementation plan for the SDGs. And of course, international collaboration in research and education is very important and very critical. But this has to be based on shared goals and capacity needs in addressing the Sustainable Development Goals. The changing landscape of science is very important for us to see. Because there are huge disparities in the production of knowledge. And this is something that has to be addressed if we really have to work together, poor and rich, to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. If you can see here, the output of world scientific research papers indexed in the Web of Science in the year 2013, the contribution of Africa as a whole, including Egypt, is only 2%. And this is half of the contribution that South Korea has made. But you see the China contribution increasing very rapidly, 16%. It used to be a few years ago much, much less than this. And the United States, of course, is leading in this by contributing 26%. But if you look at the most important and the fastest growing technology in the world today that was discussed earlier, the nanotechnology, you see the contribution of Africa is still 2%, but South Korea is 3 times Africa. So this is cutting-edge technology. And look at China. China is 30%. These are research papers published in the Web of Science, which much higher than the United States. And this is important for countries like China and also India and Brazil and these big countries in the South. These are the countries that are really changing the landscape of science worldwide. And I will come back to this to see how relevant this is going to be for the developing world. The action to promote the science, technology, and innovation to address the Sustainable Development Goals is a huge effort and a huge item that has to be addressed by various disciplines. I would just like to highlight 5 issues, but there are many, many issues that you can think of that are of equal importance. But let me just highlight the issues that I feel are important from my perspective. First of all, we have to address the issue of teaching science. The way that we are teaching science in schools and university is not going to enable the next generation of scientists to address the issue of sustainable development goals or the achievement of the sustainable development goals. We have to introduce a new type of education. And here there are 2 types of education that I feel are very important to address. The first is the inquiry-based science education, IBSE, which is promoted by the network of academies of science. And this is simply just to engage students in the learning process through experimentation, to promote their critical thinking, and to develop their problem-solving skills. So you have to involve the children in the learning process itself. And this has been implemented many, many years ago in a number of countries, including the United States, Chile, Argentina, and many other countries. Even China also is included in that. And they are showing very good and very positive results. The second is the education for sustainable development, which is promoted by the United Nations University and UNESCO, which actually addresses the issue of how to include sustainable development issues into the teaching process. Issues like climate change, natural disasters, water, energy, and poverty. And again, it's showing very positive results. So the teaching of science has to be addressed and has to be reformed. That's very important. The second, and this is with reference to the countries that are poor in science and technology, that are not as rich as the others, the so-called science and technology lagging countries, and it is the issue of universities. Universities in the majority of the S&T lagging countries are performing very poorly. So that is why we always emphasize that each country should have at least one top-class research university. Why? Because this is really needed to connect research to education, to set standards for quality and excellence, to attract the best and brightest students, and to link knowledge to global challenges. So it's important to have a model so that other universities will try to emulate it. Here, for example, you have this photograph of the University of Cape Town, which apparently currently is the best university in Africa. So if we can have in each African country one university that is like the Cape Town University, I think we will be in a much better position to address these global challenges. Integrated courses in, how many minutes? Oh my God. Yeah. Well, let me just make one point, and maybe the others are 2 points? Okay. Well, this point is very important because the way that science is taught in universities is in silos. You are taught physics, mathematics, biology, chemistry, and sometimes you do have combinations. But the science students have very little knowledge about the social problems and the social sciences. And that will never work when you want to address real-life problems. If a scientist wants to address real-life problems, that scientist must understand the social problems. So here, I mean, I suggest that in universities, students doing natural sciences must have compulsory courses on social sciences, core courses on social sciences, just to understand the social problems. And likewise, those in the social sciences have to have a minimum knowledge of the natural sciences. So this is an issue that some universities are now trying to address, but not in Africa, not in the developing world, but in the United States and in Europe. I am not going to go into this because I think Professor Hamdan mentioned how to support young scientists and how to provide support to units of excellence and centers of excellence. But let me mention my final one, which is how to mobilize the best scientists. And here, the proposal I make is that each country should have an active, independent, merit-based National Academy of Sciences and the Young Academy linked to it. Why? Because the national academies prove to be the best mobilizers of the most accomplished scientists in a country, in a region, or globally. They can mentor the next generation of science leaders. And most importantly, they provide independent, evidence-based advice on this, to the decision makers on critical sustainable development goals issues. And that is very important for, I think, every country to have an academy, merit-based, independent, but linked to it a young academy. Young academy meaning members are below the age of 40. This is, again, in many countries, has been extremely useful. In this country, for example, we have a very powerful young academy, but we do not have a powerful senior academy. And Dr. Ismail, fortunately, is trying hard now to work on this issue and to see whether Egypt, this big country, can have a strong Academy of Sciences. Thank you very much. So let me just mention my last thing. I insist that science and technology and innovation alone cannot achieve the SDGs. But without STI, the SDGs cannot be achieved. Thank you.
It will be much appreciated. There we go. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I'm always happy to come back to Alexandria. Having been here for a few years, I feel like this is my second home, and I enjoy the people and the food, and it's really a terrific place to be. So the topic today, to me, is actually very essential to economic development. I would like to start by asking, and you don't have to answer it now, besides Europe, United States, Canada, Japan, and South Korea, how many people have really moved from developing to developed countries? Very few. And we ask the question, why? Why is it there are so few countries over 80 years have really never advanced into developed nations? To answer that question, we have to go beyond just the lack of talent, the lack of ability. To me, that is not the issue. The issue is much deeper. And I'd like to give a few examples of what we really need in order to move our science and do research and innovate and improve the quality of lives of a lot of people in the world. There are two things. You gotta have money, and you have to have opportunities. It is especially very important now for the millennium young people who are coming up. Without opportunities, it is impossible for you to make contribution to your society. And without money, you cannot do anything. So what can we actually do, given I have to speak in another 2 minutes? There are certain things that can be done at all sorts of levels that can begin to galvanize your nation or your society to move towards improving the quality of life, to give opportunities to young people so they can make contribution to their families, to their society, and also move into a developed nation. So what I would say here is a recipe which one has to adopt. They are not easy, but they are possible. You have to have a functional and vibrant institutions of learning. That's universities and institutes that provide high academic standard. I would like to see equivalent of MIT in Egypt, all over Africa, where the young people don't just go in because they have connection to universities, but because of their ability to succeed and make the highest contributions in terms of their thinking, in terms of their ability, in terms of their capacity to understand the issues that involve their societies and be able to make that kind of contribution towards developed societies. There needs to be a dynamic network of researchers in universities, institutes, and businesses who are able to continuously conduct research that may or may not lead to innovation. This is actually very important. If you look at all the discoveries that has happened in the last 20, 30, 40 years, most of them came out of basic research. You have to understand the subject first, and by understanding the subject, you can then develop a solution to it. Let's take a case of HIV. It was the understanding on how the virus actually gets into the system, the enzymes that are making that enzymes get into your body or get infected. These came out of basic research. They were not even intended for any kind of innovation. And then innovation came out of that, looking at reverse transcriptase inhibitors, which was the essential enzymes that was essential for attachment of the virus to the CD4 receptors. These are the examples I'm giving about basic research. You also need to have entrepreneurs and investors who are willing to take risks to provide financial support to turn discoveries into products and new companies. And that goes to the first question, to the first point, money. Money is essential, and with money, of opportunities. The last one, which I'm going to offer, is, and I have said a few times on this podium, that without a functioning government, a government that can provide an environment that is very supportive financially and policy-wise of initiatives that enable the partnership to flourish, essentially we are simply wasting our time. Why? Because a lot of the folks who have talent, who have ability, are going to move out of that particular country and situate themselves where they have opportunities, where there's availability of financials to support their dreams. And so that is very important. It is important because if you look at the diaspora, whether it be from Asia, South America, Africa, who abandon their countries because those essential ingredients don't exist, they have fared very well. They have created companies, big companies, small companies. And therefore, we got to understand science, research, innovations. Without those essential ingredients are really not going to produce what we need. So my advice to the new generations of scientists, it may be useful for you not just to concentrate on your scientific endeavors, but rather also maybe take some side courses that involve businesses, economics, so that you are in a position to understand the language of investors. In the last 7 years, I conducted several trainings in Africa, as well as some in South America and a little bit in Asia. 1 second, yes, thank you. This course was to introduce to the scientists the understanding of intellectual property, business understanding, licensing, and I think we have made a lot of inroads in those areas. It is very essential that you just, besides your ability and your capability in science or in other kind of innovations that involve, that you understand how to leverage with those who might be interested in your work so that you can bring the income and produce more work. But also, for some of the other scientists, do not be afraid to take a career in basic research, because out of basic research, innovations occurred. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, John. Again, apologies for having to curtail your all of your presentations. William, go for it. William Saito.
Good afternoon. So I realize I only have a few minutes, so I'm going to cut down my slides a lot and also speak very fast. So I apologize in advance. I have an interesting title where I cover policy from a government of Japan perspective, but in a former life, I used to be a scientist and also a venture capitalist. So I come from not only a scientific, but also from a commercialization perspective. So I hope I could add to the discussion later in this panel. So I'm actually very connected to the importance of education in science technology in not only Japan, but in various parts of the world. In fact, in the Cabinet Office, I actually cover IT and cybersecurity, but these are all very rooted in science technology, and we see some issues in countries today who are having a lot of problems in this area. I also do help science technology in other countries, namely for Singapore at A-STAR. I also teach at universities, and I see that a lot of these developed countries, especially Asian countries and Japanese companies, we go through an educational cycle which I feel is very problematic. They tend to be very data and information driven, where you memorize things. But this is fine if you had to measure for tests and you had to create a curriculum. But what I feel that going forward in this world, we need to create a generation of scientists to really endeavor to grow knowledge, experience, and wisdom. So it's very difficult for a lot of Asian countries especially, but for countries like Japan, where they don't emphasize things like metaphors and analogies, that creativity and imagination aren't highlighted. These are things that I worry about in very developed countries that tend to do things in a very systematic manner. So going forward, my concern here is what it is to be human, that fine, up to now it was very important to gather knowledge. We used to hear discussions about connecting the dots, but I think we're way beyond that. What we're way beyond is now that the researchers and scientists really have to apply creativity and see how these dots can be formed in different ways. The other thing that I see is a failure of definition, that too many people see science technology as analytical, as a mathematics, as a science thing, whereas I think innovation is actually encompassing components of design. And this is important for countries that I see and work with quite a bit that separate the science educations with the humanities educations. But if you look at the innovation around the world today, it's a combination of that science and humanities working together. And so I think one needs to re-look at what innovation is, which is the cooperation of different facets and different technologies. The other concept that I have that I see very developed countries have a problem is the workforce, including the scientists, are very abhorred to and afraid of the word failure. And frankly, I think that innovation is not possible without the word failure. And so this goes all the way from the research institutions to corporations. And so this is a thing that countries have to be very wary of, to not create a population that is afraid of failure, and then to understand that innovation, one needs to break a few things. And so how we create societies that are tolerant of failures are very, very important in encompassing and understanding what innovation really means. Thus, I always enjoy investing in companies that have these kind of signs and these kind of mottos in their reception areas, where it's good to fail, that failure is a positive thing, and always remember that it's important to fail forward. As I was introduced, I was also part of the National Diet, the Japanese Parliament's accident investigation of the nuclear disaster in Fukushima. And what I also found interesting was Japan as a society was a failure in a sense. And what I mean by this is that all accidents, all around the world, all historical accidents, all have three things common. 1, people make mistakes. 2, machines break. And 3, accidents happen. And what's important here for the scientific community to understand is that there is no 100%, that failure is normal, and to understand these out-of-the-box kind of connections is important. Going by checklists becomes very, very tough and very, very dangerous for countries to go down, especially when it involves security and safety. That is why the other area that I emphasize is the word entrepreneur and entrepreneurship. This does not mean creating a venture, actually. Entrepreneur was originally a French word, and what it means is a change agent. And I think that's very apropos, because what an entrepreneur really is it's someone who takes an idea and makes it into a reality. So for countries, I think that this is a mindset that's important, that we need to take the research, the science, technology, and actually make it into products and so on, just because not necessarily is it possible that research dollars will continue funding your things. In closing, I want to talk about what is really changing the world and what we need to be cognizant about, which I call the 3 M's. And what I mean by this is the first M is markets. The markets are definitely global. The second M is what we call Mother Nature. We've heard about this topic a lot today. And the third M is Moore's Law. And this is fundamentally changing how we approach competitiveness and how we see innovation accelerating. I'll skip this slide. So the concern here is that what we're seeing in countries that are rapidly evolving and creating new markets is that we see words like parts, products, systems, and platforms. The unfortunate part is we're definitely moving downstream here, where parts and products are becoming commodities, and we need to become cultures to be competitive and create systems and platforms, and eventually ecosystems. We see 2 examples here, Microsoft, Apple. What I want to conclude here in the point here is that ICT, going forward for science and researchers, whether in life sciences, nothing to do with digital, doesn't matter if it has anything with computers. I fundamentally believe that with Moore's Law changing the world, that it is at the rate it is, that ICT is the key. It's the glue that connects the various innovations. It's the cross-pollination that allows the various silos to connect together and create platforms that add value at a global level. Honestly, as a government, or at least the Japanese government, S&T budgets are going down. And this is something that, as researchers, one cannot expect to happen forever. At the same time, it tends to be a moral hazard when it just gets given out, especially in some very, very developed countries. And so in countries that I work with, what I'm trying to do is institute various public-private partnerships where we work with private businesses to co-fund development projects so that we create globally relevant innovation. And then some of the things that we're trying to do around the world is implement things like the X Prize mechanisms and other competitive means to create innovation in a new form of innovation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, William Saito. And next up is João de Paias Carvalho.
And I move it here, right? Yeah. Good afternoon. This is a pleasure to be here again. And I wish to thank Bibliotheca, Dr. Sera Galdin, the outstanding and hardworking staff of the people. How do you Okay. Outstanding and hardworking staff, the people from Egypt, and its warm welcome. When I was invited for this presentation, I go back to the time of the innovation process was my day-to-day business. I understand the dynamics that move the subject today. It's not changed much. It's important to point out that innovation is a local and timely endeavor, depending to the state of the art in the region at the time it comes about and where it comes about. And innovation needs not to be a world first, but a community first. I decided to analyze the available data and test the hypotheses you see on the screen. Is economic and human development the result of innovation, education, and business incubation? Okay. Essen has asked us to address 2 challenges we believe are important for innovation and sustainable development. Take innovation to market and having innovative business, whether the first few years are crucial to create a positive reinforcement to society and government back the innovation activity. I hope this will succeed. I will succeed in demonstrating that. For that, I prepared this full table you see now on the European Union, 26 countries. This is one of sample that gives us my conclusion, but it doesn't. I don't think that all samples will have the same answer. Of course, the Global Innovation Index, which is up there, right? Comes from INSEAD Cornell WIPO annual publication and is a result of the analysis of 79 indicators, a very rich and complex study. As said in there, the Global Innovation Index leaders have created well-linked innovation ecosystems where investment in human capital combined with strong innovation infrastructures combined to contribute to high levels of creativity. It is an excellent tool for countries wishing to develop their own innovation capabilities. As you see, you can see there are columns with incubators, education index, human development index, GDP growth, short-term, GDP growth long-term, population, and per capita income. Then I ran averages that you see here. Okay, and correlations. Correlations between innovation, incubators, education, and GDP growth, population, education, and GDP per capita. Then I divided the sample into higher performers and lower performers, which are shown here, of higher performance and the lower performers. The red market countries are ex-Soviet republics. Then this table presents the averages. A statistician would have done a better job, but that's what I could do. You see that despite the difficulty to distinguish cause and effect, higher innovation indexes happen in higher human and development in richer countries. You see there? Innovation index above 50? No, it's higher innovation, higher income, higher education, higher number of incubators and all that. As you can see in the lower group, right? The ex-Soviet republics make a very large majority, showing that the enchantment that many people feel for the communist regime is a mermaid chant, causing a tremendous harm to the countries that embrace it. You see, they're still behind the poorest Occidental economies. Well, this is the correlation factors that I said. As I said, the innovation index has strong correlation with the human development index, the per capita income, and somewhat weaker with the education index. You see there? What is puzzling is the negative correlation with GDP long-term growth. It's against our belief that innovation is the power machine. It's against our belief that innovation is the power machine of development. I believe there might be two reasons for that discrepancy. The static innovation index 2015 correlated with the 25 history of GDP growth, and the fact that most of the sample is made up of developed economies with slower growth and high innovation indexes, and less developed ex-Soviet economies which have a lower innovation index but play a catch-up with steep growth. Incubators have a strong correlation with population and weaker with human development and education indexes. The negative correlation with high human development and education for the countries with low innovation index is due to the Bulgaria and Slovenia, which when excluded, becomes 1.8 and 1.4. There, it's negative, but it's not really true here. Education has a positive correlation, although weak, with GDP growth, short and long term. The correlation with GDP per capita is distorted in the case of higher innovation countries by Austria and Luxembourg. That were taken, when taken from the sample, the correlation moves to 4.48. The next three tables show the conclusions. Difficult to distinguish cause and effect, but higher innovation index happen in higher human development and richer countries. Ex-Soviet republics, despite the high growth, only after 25 years are approaching the poorer non-Soviet countries, but innovation index still lags behind. Difficult to distinguish, Innovation has a strong correlation with Human Development Index and GDP per capita, but a weak correlation with Education Index. Strangely, in the sample, innovation has a negative correlation with long-term economic growth. Business incubators have a strong correlation with population and a weaker with human development and education, but in less innovative countries have a positive correlation with human development, but with GDP growth. Education has a weak but positive correlation with GDP growth. The straight answer then for the hypothesis is the straight answer is yes, but education is more important to GDP growth than innovation in business incubators. Innovation and human development go hand in hand. Incubators contribute to social economic development and in less innovative countries. Finally, the answer to the two questions that were posed. Okay? Yes, I think that what we have to do is educate for business and entrepreneurship since early school. And we have to have more business incubators with truly complete stewardship and mentoring. I strongly believe that education is the answer on how to unleash the force of innovation to society. Also, I believe that the ecosystem is very important. Regions need to create an economic and social system where people, meaning entrepreneurs, workers, and government through policies, strive to bring innovation to market and to reward it accordingly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joao. And finally, Jason Blackstock.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, Hassan. Thank you very much to Library of Alexandria. It's always hard to go at the end of a distinguished panel like this because they've covered so many of the issues already. But I want to start by digging into the question that Hassan asked, which is, out of all of the challenges that we've heard about, what do I think is the most important one for science and innovation for sustainable development? And we've heard from, Mohammed laid out the SDIs and the challenges with meeting the sustainable development goals. We've heard about the challenges of building ecosystems of government and business from John and William and Joao. I want to focus particularly on what it means to prepare scientists and policymakers to manage the types of ecosystems, the types of knowledge systems that we're building in the 21st century. We've had, for the last 50, 100 years, a scientific enterprise that's been built up through funding agencies from national governments, through private sector increasingly getting involved. But as William pointed out, the rate of change that's going on now in terms of the technologies in which they're coming out, the challenges that we're facing with Mother Nature and Moore's Law at the same time as our markets, that leads to a system where both policymakers and scientists need to be cooperating and interacting much more than they have been traditionally. And just to put it in context, the average education, at least in the Western world, for a policymaker often includes philosophy, history, economics, very little in terms of science and engineering. And that's both a sign of what historically we have built our governance institutions to deal with, but also how we've prepared our generations of scientists to understand or to not be able to understand and engage with the policy communities, with the types of challenges we have. Let me briefly talk about, Hassan mentioned that I'm at University College London leading a department there. The department that I'm leading has a long name, Science, Technology, Engineering, and Public Policy. We shorten it to STEEP because of the long name. And we were established 3 years ago precisely because there is this gap between the societal decision-making that goes on around a variety of issues from cybersecurity to sustainability, and on the other hand, the type of engineering and science which is happening in the laboratory and in industry. There are many innovations that have been going on, not only in the technical side, but in the institutional side. For example, in the United Kingdom, the creation of science advisors in every government department, the creation of centers that bring together academia with industry and government to focus on grand challenges. The creation of STEEP at UCL was one university response to try and think about how we can bring those communities together in conversation. To put it in context, in the 1970s and 80s, MIT and Stanford began experimenting with new types of relationships with industry for their scientists. And out of that grew technology transfer, intellectual property offices. And now most major research universities around the world have significant enterprise units, which are designed to foster those relationships with industry. But we don't often have equivalent units which deal with the public sector, which deal with the challenges of transport and infrastructure, or cybersecurity and digital policy, that build the relationships not only to understand industrial problems and the challenges on technology, but the actual deployment of those technology in complex societal ecosystems in ways that can help solve particular societal challenges. The gap between the knowledge we as scientists, I'm a physicist by training, that we research in the laboratory, and the real-world deployment of energy technologies in rural Uganda or in Egypt is often very significant because there's not an understanding of the scientist working in the laboratory of the limitations that technologies may face, the social, political, economic. So that's the challenge. What's the solution? Well, I wish I could say I have the answer, but I at least have a few ideas, and particularly focusing on education. And I'm going to talk through, William laid out the challenge he sees in education between getting a lot of data and information, but converting that into knowledge and wisdom and actual experience in between. We've taken a focus in our department and in building at UCL a program on this focus of experiential learning. The idea that you can't actually train the next generation of scientists and engineers purely from textbooks and laboratory experience if you want them to work on real-world challenges. So we run a program modestly entitled How to Change the World, but it's for our second-year engineering undergraduates. And we have 800 students for 2 weeks working with organizations such as the World Bank, Department of Energy and Climate Change, the Red Cross. They get real-world challenges as simple or as complex as solve energy for rural Uganda or solve transport for London. And they have to go through a design process working with the real-world challenge partners of first grappling with what are the social, the economic, the political factors. Things that we as scientists and engineers don't often get training in the early stage of our education, even through our graduate training. And at the end of the first week, they have to write a design brief, a challenge that they then have to solve by going through a design studio. Now, this type of experiential learning is part of what I think is the solution for the next generation of scientists and engineering training. And we've been trying to not only do this at UCL, but to expand it out, because as you may have noticed, the tagline for our department is Applied in Focus, Global in Reach. These problems cross boundaries. They cross all of the boundaries that we can imagine. National boundaries, disciplinary boundaries, boundaries between government, industry, society. So we have both done a graduate program, which I'm not going to talk through, but we also run international science policy programs. This is one that we just ran in Pune in India 2 weeks ago. And these types of programs are designed to open up the dialogue and the conversation to understand how different systems in the world are coping with these complex, wicked challenges. Having these international dialogues has to be a key piece of any sort of educational program. With that, I will just emphasize again what I see not only as the challenge, but the opportunity of using education as a vehicle for bringing students into the real world, bringing the real world into the laboratory or into the education so that students are grappling with real world problems as part of their educational process and co-producing the knowledge that is needed to be applied to solve the real world challenges. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jason. Can we have the lights back up, please? Sam, are you going to join us? Okay, we have about 10 minutes for questions. Again, apologies for contracting all of you. Has anyone got any burning questions that you can't hold? I've got a question or two for our panel, but I'm just looking around, and so let's start with the gentleman at the very back. If you'd like, tell us your name and your interest and where you're from, what you do.
My name is Ramzi. I'm a sustainability practitioner, or in other words, another environmentalist with an MBA. My issue is related to innovation and creativity. And as Ken Robinson once mentioned, that people entering the first year of education this year will be retiring in 2070. We're preparing professionals for the next 50 years when we have no idea what the world will be like 5 years from now. So I'd like to hear the panel's comments on that.
Great, let's hold that question. Let's take another one. Yes, the gentleman with the luscious head of white hair. Go ahead.
I'd like to be called a snowman. That's very nice. I'm Ron Laporte. I'm an epidemiologist.
Tell us your name and your interest. And
Okay, Ron Laporte, epidemiology, Pittsburgh. I've been working with the Library of Alexandria. One of the things that we've become very interested in is the critical question of the underlying factors that you can use to increase productivity in statistics and science. And one of the things that we found is that the lack of training in research methodology, lack of training in statistics, lack of training in risk perception is a core to everything, but policymakers rarely get trained in these areas. And so what happens is the scientists talk with the policymakers, and we can't communicate because we're dealing with statistics and they're not. I was wondering, I'd like to get some sense of on the panel of how we can increase research methods, knowledge and science literacy through research methodology.
Lovely. Let's get one more, and then I'm going to go back to the panel. Do I have any more? Yes, there's a lady. Can you raise your hand a bit higher? Just in the middle, in the second row. No, come back down. You might want to stand up. There you go. Tell us your name.
Thank you. Doha Yaout. I work at the Arab Academy in Entrepreneurship Center of Entrepreneurship and Strategic Marketing. I have a personal interest in business incubators because I'm having my master's degree in business incubation, and I want to know if there is if we can network business incubators like I know there was, but it wasn't actually global. It was the National Business Incubators Association, and it didn't network widely, or somehow they are slowing down. So I was asking if we can network business incubators between colleges at least, because they have access to youth easier than other things. I need to know comments, and if there is already networks that I'm not aware of.
Lovely. Okay, well, let's just start with that question. John, do you know of networks of business incubators? Is this a good idea?
Is this working or?
Yes, it's working. Yeah.
Okay. I think one of the ways you could, I'm pretty sure, for example, Rutgers University have partnerships with some African universities. One way you could actually find out, I don't know offhand, especially for your particular case, but there are a lot of U.S. universities, incubators, who have partnership with several African countries. So that would be one avenue through which you can actually try to look at. If there's somebody who knows in the audience, in their own university or in their systems where they have partnership with the U.S. or European university or in other parts of the world, could be helpful.
William or Joao, do you know of this?
Yeah, so business incubators, I would recommend going to an organization called the Kauffman Foundation, Kauffman. They're the world's largest entrepreneurial nonprofit entity located in Kansas City. But to your question, the networking is very important. The diversity and internet connectedness is important. But it's not just university. For incubators to be successful around the world, you need three key ingredients. You need the talent, of course, that's connected to university. You also need the funding mechanism, i.e. money. And then you also need to have a cluster or industry group that is receptive to the research being done. And so unless those three are together within that vicinity, incubators are tough anywhere around the world.
Great. And Joao, do you have something to add?
It would be a repetition of what they said.
Okay. Let's go back to our first question, which is really about, are we training our young people for the challenges in a world which, if they don't inherit, it'll be their children? And I'd like to start with Jason. What do you think?
The nice, easy question.
Yeah.
The short answer is no. We're currently not preparing them efficiently or effectively. There needs to be, I spoke about experiential learning as one of the tools and models, but there's a lot of things about adaptability. William brought up the point that you need to learn how to fail. And in a world that is changing so fast, where the landscape of what worked yesterday isn't going to work tomorrow due to automation, due to rapidly changing markets and job opportunities, having students go through experiences of repeatedly learning and failing new systems is much more critical than necessarily having textbook rote knowledge. So we do require a revamp of our education curriculum to deal with that. And also developing the capacity of futures foresight horizon scanning, the ability of students to look at the changing landscape and have a sense of the different scenarios and future pathways, and think about what it means to be adaptable if any of them come about. You can't just have a solution that is fit for one path now. You need a solution which is robust against any number of possible future scenarios, and that type of thinking we don't yet incubate.
Hassan, you talked about inquiry-based education, and I've seen slides like yours, and you've, I'm sure, written them over many, many years, and yet we don't get to a point where people actually implement inquiry-based education. Why is that?
Well, the program has been implemented in a number of countries, and it has been running, you're right, for a number of years. I think it is probably over 15 years. And in some countries like Chile, for example, they've carried out an assessment and the impact of this new way of teaching science, inquiry-based, and to see how students, for example, who have taken these courses at the school level perform at the university level and above. And apparently the results are very encouraging. So it looks at those, if you teach the students in the way that they can understand and absorb the science or the mathematics, by doing the experiments themselves and just the teacher guiding them through the process, it looks as though this will really provide the student with this critical thinking that is really very much required. I would just like to say something about the innovation and how you can train the next generation of leaders. At the moment, one can think of innovation as innovation consisting of three parts: the science and technology innovation, the business innovation, and maybe the social innovation. But unless you integrate these three in one integrated fashion, you will never find the next generation of scientists or innovators solving real problems. Because you should not stop at just science and technology innovation. You have to carry it all through until you commercialize the whole product and the result and make it available in a particular specific area. So this integrated innovation, I think, is a key for training the next generation of problem-solving scientists.
Thank you. And just really on to the middle question, William, do the policymakers that you interact with, do they know about research methodology? Do they need to be taught it, or are they pretty conversant with it?
Well, I mean, let me tie the first question and the second question together and answer the latter one as well. Actually, it's an easy problem in a sense, because I put it this way. Anybody who has children who are in elementary school today, by the time they're adults, 65% of the jobs will not exist. And so, so what do you do? And as policymakers, I really believe that governments are very bad selectors of innovation, that there has not been any government on the planet who has selected some innovation type. What governments can do and policymakers can do is, all they can do is create an environment to allow for the serendipity, allow for the experimentation, allow for the failure. But what I do know is clear. The answer for me is easy because, as I mentioned in the presentation, Moore's law states that these things will grow exponentially, and hence anything that's repetitive, anything that's automated, anything that can be put together on a multiple choice test will be taken over by computers anyway. So those jobs will go away. It's how you create and bring out the humanness that I think policymakers need to emphasize on how S&T go forward.
And yeah, Jason, just on that point.
Yes, this aspect of failure is very important. There are some countries and some societies that have very large resistance to failure. Like the country I come from, Brazil, once you go bankrupt, you're worthless, And so this is a thing that has to be changed. And frankly, I don't know how to change that in the society that is crystallized. The second thing is that innovation, most of the people here think about innovation, well, I'm going to do something that's going to be the world first. And that is not necessary. Innovation is a local thing. You can innovate in a way of doing business in your local community, and that has, and this is a step forward. Is a stepping, you have to go up the stairs, to end up doing an innovation that is a world champion.
Jason, just on the research methodology point.
Yeah, just on the specific, I'm trying not to put on my professor hat and give a lecture on it, because we do end up teaching not only scientists and engineers, which I focused on here, but also the policy community. And let me just highlight 3 points. And the first is actually to push the problem a little bit back at the scientific community, which is to say there are better and worse ways to communicate statistics and risk perception. And I think we often, a lack of understanding of policymaker communities, of the pressures they face, of the languages they use, is one of the main deficits in that communication. It's not being put in a language they understand. So there's a certain amount that we have to do as scientists to get better for that. There's a requirement for knowledge brokers as well in that capacity. And for example, I mentioned it very briefly, but the role of a science advisor. That's something that was talked about only generally as a science advisor to a president or a prime minister 20, 30 years ago. Now it is becoming a much more routinized thing in every government department on different projects and programs. And I think we need to be, this goes to my third point of education, we need to be preparing scientists and engineers to work in that role and policymakers to work in that role. And I talked mostly about education at undergraduate and sort of early career level, but to go to William's point that 65% of the jobs aren't going to exist when those school kids are adults, actually that's still in most mid-career people's lifetime as well. So the jobs that we're in may not exist in that time. I'm worried an AI might replace me. So at that stage, education becomes something throughout life, and training programs for policy communities, for continuing professional development in dealing with risk perception, risk management, understanding of scientific information is something that I think universities have a responsibility to start developing and rethinking, not just undergrad education and postgrad education, but lifelong education. And I think that's a big shift that's coming in the way universities do business in the next 20 years.
Jason, thank you so much. My thanks to the panel. I know that my job as a journalist is fast disappearing, but I still have one journalist left who's going to give us a little rapporteur summary. Mohammed Yahya from Nature Middle East, please can you join us? You have 4 minutes. What a test for a journalist. And tell us what you think. Thank you.
Thank you, Ehsan, and thanks to the panel. I will try to make this as short as possible. We have heard from a stellar panel, and it's so interesting to listen to these wonderful people from vastly different backgrounds and experiences, and see this thread that passes through all the talks and everything that they have outlined as too real for me. What I heard from everyone here today is about, mainly it revolves about creating enabling environments, which particularly resonates with me as a young person, or so I prefer to call myself at least. And as the challenges grow, especially in the global south, it can often feel the challenges are insurmountable, I would say. But I was really interested in how everyone outlined or touched upon ICT as a possible opportunity that we have today. And I would personally argue that humanity had never been in this point before, what the ICT revolution can bring to us, from connecting people to education. it's literally mind-boggling, and so many things out there that are untapped in a very vastly changing world, and it's exciting to be part of that. And what I heard from the panel is that as we need changes and with proper foresight and genuine interest from policymakers, we can tap into ICT to tackle most of these challenges. I think one thing that resonated a lot with the speakers and with me personally is education. And I'm sure that anyone who's been through school or university in the developing world will understand the misery it can often be. And I've been through that. It's not very nice to remember. But I also believe that we are at the point where we can tap into ICT and the internet to break through that barrier of education in the global south and be able to expand into something different. Knowledge is basically at our fingertips, and we've never had that much amount of information before, and knowledge just waiting for us to tap into. And I think that the internet will play a extremely important role in the future in how traditional education whether it survives or not. There will be vastly different ways of education, and schools, universities, everything will have to tap into the internet, or they might have to disappear. And I think that's exactly how this technology can resonate and change everything. There's also the point of connecting people, and it's really interesting because we've never had that interconnected world before, and as challenging as it could be for the global south or the developing world, there's also so much potential in the ability to use the internet and cell phones, which are quickly making their way through Africa and Asia as well. And soon everyone will have one of these as well and will be able to connect to people around the world. And I think something that's particularly been mentioned early in the talks today, it would be amazing to see how this technology can be used to connect the global south together. There's so much opportunity there. And just about wrapping up. And the internet can help tap into that. So just to wrap everything up, I think that there are so many challenges, especially in the global south, but also in the developed world. Things are changing so quickly, but there's also so much opportunity waiting out there, so many enabling technologies waiting out there that we can make use of. And while we stand at a time that is very unknown, it also can be quite exciting. And I think that young people, especially, they hold the key to that, with enough foresight from policymakers and governments to be able to enable them to make the best of these technologies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mohammed. I just want to thank our panel, Jason Blackstock, Joao, William, John, and Mohammed. Thank all of you for being a lovely audience. I think for me, one of the lessons to take home is that we all need to win a Nobel Prize, because that way we can get almost double the time that's been allotted to us for our presentations. With that, thank you very much, and please enjoy your coffee break.